Greetings everyone, this is Tim Anderson, aka Renfail, and welcome to the latest episode of Mondays in MMORPGs, where I cover all things related to the genre and the pros and cons of the various systems. Today we are going to be exploring names in role-playing environments, specifically names in MMORPGs. We're also exploring a new format, which is me in videos, so hello everyone. Typically I've been doing these as a podcast, even though it's not technically a podcast since I'm hosting on YouTube right now, and that's because I haven't finalized my decision about whether or not this is going to be a vodcast or a podcast long term. So I'm going to be testing this format. I want you guys to let me know, what do you think? Do you prefer it this way, or do you prefer just the audio version? Because once we get set up and moved in 2018, I will be making a finalized decision about how this is going to continue as a series. I may continue doing it as a podcast, or if you guys like it enough where you get to see this, if this is what you prefer. I'm not sure if I feel sorry for you, if I'm flattered by that, but be that as it may, if this is what you prefer, this torpid format, I'm potentially going to be doing this live on Twitch as an interactive type of series with the community moving forward. So let me know in the comments below. So let's jump right into this. So I did a blog post several years ago talking about role-playing names. The blog post, if you're interested, was called "The Roleplay Police Enforcing Fantasy Names." I'm going to read the first paragraph off verbatim and then jump into some other stuff from the mmorpg.com forums. So, we've all seen it. Fancy Pants Kick Your Nuts. Ranger Down is your boss. Phantaz. Gandalf Pussmaster. I should also add any variant on Strider, Aragorn, or Legolas at this point. Also Driz. On and on the list goes. Childish names from childish players who lack imagination and who aren't really there to be immersed in a virtual world, but instead are only playing a video game. Now I'm going to hop over to the mmorpg.com forums where I found a blog post, or excuse me, a forum post, I think from back in 2009. Yeah, May of 2009. So here's a list of names that people saw in games. Pop My Cherry, Jerkovsky, Gold Diggers, Rump Pirate, Colonel Angus, Rug Muncher, Mike Hunt, Golden Shower Guy, Fisting Kids, Pro Incest, It Bleeds, It Breeds, Beat My Baby, Baby for Sale, Sexy Baby for Cash. These are all variants of names found in MMORPGs that are offensive at the very least, and at the very most have absolutely no reference in a fantasy environment. They shouldn't be there. They're things that make sense in our world from a really stupid, childish sense of humor point of view, but have nothing to do whatsoever with a fantastical environment or a world that's been created to have its own lore and its own world and its own language, even in some cases. So when we started looking at how we wanted to do things, we went back to the older style of games. So looking at World of Warcraft in the early days, even though World of Warcraft was a lot more lax than, say, EverQuest was, they still, in that particular post at mmorpg.com, for example, they were talking about one player in World of Warcraft whose name was, somehow he got the name Rapist. And as soon as he got in the game, that very quickly was reported by players in the guild, and within a couple of hours, the GMs had forced that player to change his name, and that was in World of Warcraft. And I can actually remember in EverQuest 1 many years ago, the GMs being very proactive about requiring players to change their names if they had something that was offensive. And on the one hand, you had the developers themselves, the GMs themselves, going around looking for names and trying to screen things from the character creation standpoint. But on the other hand, there was also the community, and the community themselves reporting names that they found that were considered to be offensive. Now, there's various ways to look at this. There's definitely a potential for abuse when you allow players to report other players. Something I really appreciate, which I noticed recently because I was reporting a gold seller in Final Fantasy XIV, is that they actually have a pop-up as you're reporting someone's name, and it says, you know, if you're reporting this person for any other reason than RTM or gold selling or whatever, there will be repercussions to you just blatantly reporting someone just because you want to be a douchebag to them. So it's very important, I think, to have that level of hands-on management from the GM staff, because I know something I saw up close and personal when I was on the roleplay server of, I think it was called Laurelin in Lord of the Rings Online several years ago. It's probably been more like a decade ago now. At one point, there was a group of players who were so hardcore in the sense that they were purists, Tolkien purists. They spoke Elvish, they spoke Dwarvish, and they were very, 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 very hardcore about making sure that anybody who rolled a Dwarvish character or an Elvish character on that server had a name that fit in with the actual, the actual language and grammar that Tolkien himself had created for these languages. And they would go around and report players who didn't fit into that extremely narrow niche. And that's unfortunate, because that to me is not, these aren't things, I mean, if using this as an example, I might not be a Tolkien fanatic. I'm not a purist, but I am a Tolkien fan. I might not know anything about Tolkien. I might have seen the movies and thought that that's a really cool thing, and then I find out that there's this MMORPG that I want to play. Cool, I'm going to go create this character. I find, you know, I can create an elf. Oh, cool, I can be like Legolas, and I create an elf, and I give him a name like, it doesn't really matter. Let's just say Theron. And then I log in the server, and I'm playing for a couple of weeks, and suddenly one day I find myself being harassed by these players who are sending me telling me that I need to change my name because the word Theron isn't elfish enough. It doesn't fit into the lore for the game. That is harassment, and that's going kind of a step too far, in my opinion. But this is when it's tricky waters, because at what point do you need to police, and at what point are you encroaching on someone's freedom of speech or freedom of expression? So, you know, there's kind of two sides to this coin, but the one thing that I think that we can all agree on is that when it comes to a fantasy world and a fantasy environment, we want to preserve that world and keep it as immersive as possible. And when you have players running around with names like Fisting Kids and Rump Pirate and Jerkovsky, I think that that is pretty clear that it's detracting from the immersion in the environment. It's offensive, and it has no place in a role-play setting. So one of the things we decided very early on with our own game was that we were definitely going to have a naming policy in place. So for those of you who weren't aware of this, we've got good news of you. For those of you who know that we want to keep it real, as realistic as we can, our MMORPG is a role-play preferred game with an actual naming policy in place. What does that mean? Well, it means that we, from a developer standpoint, are going to be actively policing characters when they're running around playing in our game, and we're going to be asking the community themselves to be policing the environment as well. We're not so much concerned about players who create, say, some version of Strider or Aragorn or Gandalf or Legolas, because yeah, that lacks imagination, but it's not offensive. So in those cases, there are some things where we might let things slide. I can't say for certain how we're going to do it, but I know that we are definitely going to be looking out for anybody who has any sort of a name that means something offensive, whether it's in English or otherwise. It's tricky, and on the one hand, we know that there's going to be players who are probably going to try to abuse that system, but hopefully we can have something in place that's very similar to Final Fantasy XIV, where if a player gets caught trying to harass another player for saying that their name is offensive when it's really not, then we'll definitely be looking at punishing the player who did the reporting in the first place, because there should be repercussions for reporting someone just for being, just because you're being mean. So it's tricky. We understand that it's tricky. We're going to be looking at the best ways that we can possibly do this while maintaining as much freedom as we can for the players who are going to be creating their characters in our game. But the most important thing to keep in mind is that this is a fantasy world. It's a world where we want everyone to come and have fun, everybody to be able to come and enjoy. And if your idea of creating a character has something to do with fisting other people or anything offensive or anything of that nature, you're going to very quickly find yourself being required to make a name change when you are playing our game. So keep that in mind. What do you think? Are name policies required? Are they too much? Are they too heavy-handed? Is it something that we should be letting the players do? Is that up to you, the player, to determine? Or do you think that it's something that needs to be policed? Definitely look forward to hearing from you guys in the comments below. Stay tuned. Don't forget to subscribe if you like these episodes. And I will see you in 2018 after we get past the holidays. Cheers, guys.